I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Love and Science podcast. I have an amazing guest today. Her name is Dr. Trina Dorrah. She's somebody I've been following for a very long time because she is a physician coach who is absolutely amazing. And she is here today to share her story about coaching and possibly her own fertility story, because there's so much wisdom when we come together and share why we do what we do and what we've learned. And I really can't wait for this conversation today. So, by way of introduction, she's an internal medicine physician and a life coach for women physicians. She's been a hospitalist for 18 years. And, as we talk about a lot in Love and Science, she truly understands the exhaustion, overwhelm, and self-doubt that can come with a career in medicine. She started her coaching journey in 2020 after training at the life coach school, which is where I also trained. And she also later earned her ICF certification through Symbiosis. So that's sort of like the international coaching certification. She's a certified relationship-centered communication coach and a certified intuitive eating counselor. So maybe we'll get into some of that as well. And her varied interests reflect her belief that true well-being comes from caring for both mind and body with compassion, curiosity, and balance. So, one other aspect before we get into the conversation I really appreciate about Trina is that she is really known as the affordable life coach, and she's figured out ways to really figure out affordable coaching, which is wonderful. And really her mission is to help women with the burnout, improve communication and reconnection with the joy that brought them into medicine in the first place. So without much more ado, let's welcome Dr. Trina Dorrah. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'd love to know a little bit about how you wandered into the coaching realm, because it, sounds like that's been a very meaningful source of your life over the last few years. Like what got you curious in the first place?
Initially I hired a fitness coach. And so that was around 2019, I believe, that I hired a fitness coach. And he had a program. And even though he was a male coach, his audience was, I would say, 95% women. And he did kind of a group program. I was in like a pod with some other women, and it was really a meaningful experience. And I remember being one of those people that kind of laughed at the idea of a life coach. And he didn't even specifically call himself a life coach, but that was essentially what he was doing. He started as a fitness coach, but then he was incorporating a lot of mindset. And I remember kind of, laughing about it at first. And then I think one thing that really kind of changed my mindset at that time, I was experiencing some burnout in medicine. I don't think I knew what it was at the time. I just knew I was kind of unhappy. And in my group of women that I was with, there was a lady who was a nurse practitioner. And over the course of the coaching program, she decided to leave her job. And I remember just thinking, I was like, wait, you can just leave your your job? I was like, that's something people do just because they're unhappy. And she had kind of come to that realization through this coaching program. And I didn't end up leaving my job. I actually used coaching to help me kind of fall in love with my job again. But I think that
Mm.
was when I first sort of realized that coaching was a thing and it could actually make your life better. And that's whenever I started wanting to become a coach. So first I kind of experienced coaching, and then I did a couple other coaching programs where I experienced coaching. And then I really started seeing like, oh, okay, you can use this to make your life better. And like I said, the first person I saw that with left her career in medicine. I knew I wanted to stay. And so then I started meeting other physicians who were coaches. And I started learning that, hey, you could use coaching to actually enjoy medicine again and to decrease
Mm.
burnout and want to stay in medicine. And that was so helpful. And then, the very next year was when COVID started. And so having the tools of coaching when we were going through COVID, I think was so incredibly helpful with my mental health during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's around the time that I was also appreciating coaching and using coaching for my own, sanity, I guess you'd say.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you have, you needed some assistance to conceive. Did you discover coaching like after that time or during that time? Like was coaching at all a part of your experience when you were going through that phase of your life?
No, it wasn't. Let's see, that would have been 20, let's see, I got married in 2014,
Mm,
and we pretty much immediately started for a child. And I started doing infertility treatments, I would say maybe 2015, if I'm remembering correctly. 2015, definitely by 2016, I had started doing some infertility treatments. And so, no, because I didn't really find coaching until 2019, 2020. Now,
mhm.
though, that I know the skills of coaching, I could definitely see how it would have helped had
Yeah.
I known the things that I know now.
Yeah. I'm curious about that. If you'd be willing to share a little bit about your journey of fertility, I think that would be really, really helpful. I think one of the hardest parts about this journey is that people feel so alone
Mhm.
and they feel like there's not nobody like them who's also experiencing anything similar, balancing a busy career as a physician and trying to squeeze in appointments for fertility and the uncertainty and everything. And
Right.
yeah, if you'd be willing to share what you remember from that time, that would be
Yes.
really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that it's so much so I am married to my second husband. So I'm sure you have some listeners who feel that maybe their prime fertility years might have been wasted on
Yes.
a failed relationship. And so I do remember having some of those thoughts whenever I was going through the fertility journey, because I was married to my first husband in my 20s,
Mm,
and or kind of later 20s, and then I married my second husband in my mid 30s. And
yeah,
so that's why I said we kind of started trying almost immediately.
makes
But I
sense.
do remember there definitely being thoughts that would come up in my head that if only I had, met the one that was going to be, my husband for forever in my 20s, like that this wouldn't be happening to me. So there was definitely a lot of that, like kind of like anger or regret that the person I wanted to have kids with, I
Mhm.
didn't meet until later. Certainly there's thoughts that would come up about, well, maybe if I hadn't chosen medicine, then this wouldn't be happening, because when you choose a career in medicine, you're so focused on medicine that oftentimes you're putting off having children. And I definitely think, I work with medical students and residents now, and I definitely think that there is still some of that mindset, although I have seen some residents who have families now. And so
Mhm.
maybe there is more room for that. Maybe there are some residencies where that is more welcome. But I feel like when I was going through it, just my mentality was, if you're going to choose medicine, you can't have a family. So like I just
Right.
kind of put that out of my mind whenever I was going through training, and then I got married and that marriage didn't work out. And so then I kind of had that anger at finding my husband later in life, a little bit of frustration that maybe medicine did this to me. You have all those thoughts, and I
Yes.
think that's where coaching could have been helpful had I knew the skills where I could have coached myself. If I had really known about coaching, I could have hired a coach to even just
Mhm.
help me work through those thoughts. Um, so I can pause there if you have any questions about that. Otherwise, I can keep going.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's so common what you said is sort of, yes, this person, I was with this person for so many in my most fertile years and then, know better, do better, but then being this much older and sometimes I wonder, I'm divorced too and I wonder like, I feel so much wiser now and I also feel like I think to myself, "Oh, I should have made a better decision," or if I'd only not made that decision. But I also realized that, like, even if something better or different had come along at that point, I don't think it would have been in my magnetic field because I'm such a different person now too. And so I think you're right, like that mindful self-compassion, like I made the best choices that I could. Sometimes it's really hard to get out of relationships that aren't working for various reasons, or some relationships end abruptly. And, that is, medicine takes so much of our time. People always say to me, why did you stay for so long in your bad marriage? And honestly, Trina, like, I think if I wasn't in medicine, I would have had more reserve to be like, this is unacceptable. But working 80, 100-hour weeks as we do, I was just like, there's no gas in the tank. I can barely charge my cell phone at night. Like, I'm not going to talk about, ending this relationship and a divorce and all of those things. And so I think it's very understandable and very relatable what you shared, because, especially for people who either are on their second marriage, or maybe people haven't met another partner yet, and their reproductive years are narrowing, and they're like, there's just all this, anger and blame and shame and all of those negative feelings that I think really do need to be worked through to be free of them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that now I have a different perspective, and I do believe more like this was how it was supposed to happen. And I think a lot of that mindset, in coaching we talk a lot about like choosing mindsets that are helpful for you, and I definitely think that over time, like I've kind of gotten to that point where I'm like, it's not helpful to say, oh, I wish this hadn't happened, because it did and I can't change it. And
Right.
so
Right.
I think it has become much more remembering it wasn't, the first marriage wasn't all bad. There were a lot of good things that came from it. It got me to the place where I am now. It was supposed to happen this way. And I
Mm,
think that that helps take away a lot of the pain and the anger whenever I can think of it a little bit differently. But of
yeah.
course, that takes some time to get there.
Oh, 100%, 100%. That's so relatable. Um, so I'm also curious. So if you think back to that time when you were in the throes of the fertility treatments and, working as an attending and everything, what do you remember was the hardest part,
Right. The hardest one. Well,
or
so
the
I
greatest
remember,
challenge per
I'd
se?
gotten
Yeah.
married. Like I said, we weren't using birth control or anything like that because we were in our mid 30s, and so it I wasn't getting pregnant, and so we did decide, let's just go ahead and reach out to a fertility specialist. And so I think that was one thing that we decided to do. I know that there are some guidelines about when try for this long, and then if it's not working, then go meet with
Right.
somebody. But I think we were maybe a little bit more aggressive, and we were just kind of like, hey, let's just go ahead and meet with someone. There's no harm in talking to someone. And
Yeah.
I remember the fertility specialist didn't just jump right to IVF. The first thing that he tried was just medication. So first we tried a medication, and then when that didn't work, then we moved to an IUI. Is what I remember. And I assume your listeners are familiar with those
Oh
terms.
yeah. This
Okay.
is like all, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And so we did that. And then I remember I did maybe 3 rounds of the IUI. And then we moved to in vitro fertilization. That was whenever it got to be more challenging with my job. Now I'm a hospitalist, so that definitely helps because at my job, full time is week on, week off. So already there were a lot of days that I was off. But the thing that really allowed me to be able to juggle the two is having understanding partners. So I think it's one of those things where, like, a lot of times you want to keep it to yourself that you're going through IVF because you know that, it may not be successful. You just don't want a lot of people prying. But there was one partner that I had to tell. And he was one of those partners who was always, willing to help out, always willing to switch. He was an older gentleman actually in our group, and I did tell him what was going on because I remember there being a time when I was supposed to have some sort of procedure done, and I took off the day, and then I went in, and then they were like, "Oh, your uterine lining's not quite as thick as we want. Can you come back tomorrow?" I was just like, "Wait, but I took today off. I don't have tomorrow off."
Right, right,
And
right.
that's where having that partner that I had told what was going on was very helpful, because then
Mhm.
I remember, like, I immediately messaged him and I was like, "This is what's going on. Can you work tomorrow?" And he was like, "Oh, absolutely." But that was the thing that I think was so hard, was even when you try to plan it, the plans sometimes fall through.
Yep.
And then a lot of times you just can't plan it. Like it's
Right.
just based on your body and what your body's doing. And you find out on very, very short notice. And so that's the hard thing.
Yeah, because I think medicine can often be very inflexible, and there's patients, and there's, the longer we go, and I feel like things are becoming more and more bureaucratic. It's like, oh, you can't do that, or
Mhm.
you get dinged in some way. And so I think it takes some vulnerability to be open in the first place. You kind of have to choose who are your safe people. But I think if possible, just saying to somebody, if not everybody, I need some flexibility. I need some, I will pay you back. I just,
Right.
I have this going on in my life right now, and I think that's sort of really the ideal situation, to have that support. But
Right.
I know not everybody does have that support, and that can
Yeah.
be really
And
challenging.
I think that's true. And it might depend on the type of specialty you're in. Like I said, I'm a hospitalist.
Yeah.
There are a lot of women who are hospitalists. But like I said, in this story, it was a man who was very understanding.
Mm,
Uh, of what I was going through and very willing to help me. So yes, you're right. Not everyone has that, but I do think if you can work with your partners, I think most people understand this, this journey, especially in medicine, because there's so many people struggling with infertility in medicine. And I
I think
think
so.
most people understand that there does need to be a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. If you had the coaching tools that you have now, how might you have sort of approached the journey in a slightly different way? I know you said that you kind of might have looked at your past in a way that was a little bit more gentle and kind. Is there anything that you can think of that, like, as you did the day to day of like the waiting for your results and the embryo
Mhm,
development, everything, just sort of thinking, if you could have had that then, what you would have
mhm.
appreciated?
Yeah, I think that coaching and then even just kind of like mindfulness tools could have been very helpful because there's just a lot of stress and anxiety that goes into the journey.
Yeah.
And even whenever it doesn't work out, right, there's a lot of disappointment and heartache. And I think having some strategies of how to work through those emotions could have been very helpful. Because again, I think a lot of people keep their infertility journey to themselves. And so it's not something that they're sharing with a lot of people. Or maybe even if you have a friend who you are sharing it with, even though they may be a great friend, they may not have ever experienced anything like this. And so you have all these emotions and it's hard to know what to do with them. And whenever I would go see my physicians, that's not their role, right? They did not have time to sit down and do a coaching session with me, or and I, didn't have a therapist or anybody I was working with. I think so. I didn't really have anybody to talk to. So I think
Mm,
coaching tools would have been so helpful at that time just to help me have something to do with the emotions and the fears and dealing with the disappointment
mm.
and learning to stay, like I said, mindful and thought patterns and processes that are more helpful.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that. I think, I always say I wish I had discovered these coaching tools so much sooner. Right? We get them when we get them, and then we can like sort of decide how to integrate them moving forward. And also, like, we both have like how to help other people learn these tools, because I
Right.
think that's part of the power, is empowering other people to then, learn these and make them very applicable to their personal
Right.
lives. But I'm
And I remember
curious.
it was,
Yeah.
oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No,
I
no,
was just
please go ahead.
going to say,
Yeah.
I remember during that time, I had another friend who was trying to get pregnant, and she got pregnant before I did. And it's hard, right? Like
It's
it's
so
and when you're
hard.
going through the process, you're very aware of everyone who's getting pregnant.
Yep.
Um or even all the maybe the nurses you're working with who are getting pregnant or people talking about their kids or whatever. And it's
Yeah.
so easy to feel anger and bitterness and jealousy and all of those emotions, which are normal emotions, and it's okay to feel them. But then, a lot of times we would talk, as you know, during our coach training about like, how long do you want to dwell in that emotion? Like, it's fine to feel it, but like, how long do you want to dwell in it? And I think that that's where maybe the coaching could have helped. Like, yes, it's normal to feel some jealousy about somebody else who it's working out for, but
Mhm.
how can I move past this in a healthy way, or how can I deal with this emotion in a healthy way?
Yeah. And I think so much of coaching is figuring out what are our emotions in the first place. Because if you're like me, I had never really considered it. It was just like work a little harder, run a little harder, just like numbing, numbing, numbing. And then once I finally was like lifted up the hood of the car, I was like, holy goodness, there's a lot going on in there. So then, like, first is the awareness of what am I feeling? And then the mechanisms to process those feelings in a way that doesn't steal more than it needs to, but kind of honors the data. I think of thoughts and
Right.
feelings as data, the data of what those feelings are trying to tell us, right?
Right.
So it's wonderful that you're able to do that. But you're right, those friendship dynamics are so complicated. We do a lot of coaching on friendships and family and holidays. I mean, as of the time of this recording, the holidays are coming up soon, and you just can feel the anxiety building.
Mhm.
And it's also not even just the major holidays and all the hullabaloo that goes on around those with the parties and such. It's the softer holidays. It's the first day of school and everybody's on social media, and it's the baby shower announcements and Halloween even, is I think we have to think Mother's Day, Father's Day, like all those hallmark things that are supposed to be happy. It's just kind of another dagger of like the expectations that haven't happened yet. So figuring out how to help people along the way so that this journey doesn't steal all the joy. I think
Right.
that's something that I feel very passionate about, especially
Hmm.
women physicians who are giving their lives to medicine, right? Yeah. So one thing we had talked about, in preparation for this conversation was emotional eating. And, my listeners know that I struggled with an eating disorder back when I was a teenager and in college, competitive runner, all the things. And I think, navigating a healthy relationship with food and body in general can be really challenging. I think that female physicians, as I'm sure seem to have a very high rate of a history or current, disordered body image or disordered eating and emotional eating and all the things that can come along with that. So can you tell me a little bit more about even though you do a lot of, general life coaching for female physicians, that's an area that you have expertise in. Can you just share a little bit more
Hmm.
about, what you've learned and how that also might pertain to the fertility journey, where
Hmm.
the treatments themselves make us more hungry, the progesterone, the increased metabolic demand, which then increases some of the
Hmm.
desire to go to the pantry and whatever else that is
Right.
calling. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think it's all connected. So, a lot of times with emotional eating, it's not about the food. It's about trying to deal, of course, with an emotion by eating. And so, of course, when you're going through the fertility journey, are a lot of emotions. I also remember one time whenever I was about to do an IVF cycle, I remember the physician saying something like, I think you should lose 10 pounds. If you lose 10 pounds, it'll probably go better for you. And, maybe that's true, but then, you're kind of like, okay, well, how am I, how am I supposed to do that? I'm on all of these hormones that I'm having to take. And, um, then also, like you said, your emotions are causing you maybe to engage in eating for reasons other than hunger. And then now you feel all this pressure, like, oh my gosh, maybe that's why I haven't been able to get pregnant, because I'm 10 pounds overweight, right? If I just lost those 10 pounds. And you might resort to disordered eating as a way to try to lose the weight. And so, yeah, it's a very difficult time. My journey is that I did struggle with an eating disorder as well. I didn't get treatment for mine until 2021, or
Wow.
definitive treatment, I should say. Along the way, there had been some attempts at treatment, in the past that didn't work, but definitive treatment, 2021. And so that was after my whole journey. And so
Wow,
I
Trina.
didn't have the tools at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think I did a lot of times respond just by by eating. to try to deal with emotions. It would have been so helpful had I been through eating disorder treatment, I think ahead of time,
Yeah.
just so I could have had a healthier relationship with food. And then again, learned how to deal with emotions in a way that didn't involve eating, or a lot of times
Mhm.
people try to deal with emotions by restricting. So just, binging, purging, whatever. All of that would have been helpful to have dealt with beforehand. But again, just the way the sequence of things worked out, I got I found my way to help afterwards. But I certainly would
Wow.
encourage any listeners who think that they might have an eating disorder, struggle with eating issues, to seek help, because it's definitely very helpful to get that treated.
Yeah, and I think, it's a good reminder that people in all body sizes and shapes can have eating disorders. I think sometimes as physicians, we were taught this very narrow DSM view of like anorexia and bulimia and, this sort of gray zone of eating disorders not otherwise specified. But I think that, we can never assume, right, based on somebody's body shape or size, that they're not struggling. And I think
Right.
it makes a lot of sense to ask, the question. I mean, I think at my worst, I was probably spending 70 to 80% of my thoughts on food and body. And, I think about, I've talked with other coaches, physician coaches, about this, and just think of if we had that, even that mental energy, right, to spend on other endeavors, if that was freed up, like, just thinking about that power and that freedom, it's very humbling for me to think about that. And so, um, what would so many people talk about their bodies changing during IVF and, this sort of gaining and restricting and all these different messages and patterns and such. What would you say to somebody who's listening now who is struggling, or maybe they were struggling and it got better for a little bit, but now this fertility treatment has been a trigger and it's sort of gotten, you know, out of control is such a weird way to say it, but
Right.
it's kind of hit that threshold where it's no longer manageable. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, so I definitely always encourage people to get help. That's what I always
Yeah.
say. I say as a physician, it's hard, right? Like, it's hard to admit that there is something that we need help for. I had to take time off of work to go get help, so I had to take FMLA. I always encourage people, FMLA is there for a reason, take it, whether it be to get help with eating issues or other mental health, or even for your IVF journey or your infertility journey, I should say. Uh, FMLA is there, vacation is there. We should be taking those things, they're very important.
Mm.
And I think that it gave me the space by taking the 6 weeks off of work. It gave me the space to really focus on treatment and healing, and just getting a better, developing a better relationship with my body and a better relationship with food, and not worrying as much about what the exact number on the scale says, but thinking of health in maybe a more holistic way. And that health is more than just the number on the scale. Health is also whether I'm sleeping. Health is whether I am meditating, or, those
Mm.
types of things. And so I think that as you're going through a infertility journey, I remember one time seeing a dietitian, and they were just kind of, the traditional dietitian, who was just sort of like, this is how much vegetables should be on your plate and how much carbs should be on your plate. you
Oh, Trina, I
know
saw a dietitian in college and I told her how much weight I'd gained because I was trying to like develop, and it was some not a great number, but I mean it was like 7 pounds or something, whatever. I was like,
Mhm.
objectively speaking, I've gained 7 pounds. And she was like, "Oh, that's a lot." And I was just like, and that sent me into a new tailspin. And so I
Right.
think I think your point is well taken. We have to first acknowledge that we need help and then carve out the time and space to get the help that we need, but also to make sure that the team that we're choosing jives with our values and our priorities, that they're going to
Yes.
hold us with a tenderness and that they understand the journey. Because some very well meaning dietitians and other people in this field don't always say the best thing. Sometimes it can be worse. And so just that sort of always
Yes.
remaining our own advocate to tune into our intuition, you know, maybe it's the good medicine that we need, but maybe it truly is not a good fit. And that's
Right.
where I think sometimes how do I feel in the context of this person?
Right.
Is this right for me? And so I'm
And
so glad.
ultimately,
Yeah,
I
go
I
ahead.
found a dietitian who's she dealt with a lot of eating disorders, but not just eating disorders. She was just more of a holistic dietitian, and she didn't focus on specifically what your weight was,
Mhm.
and she wasn't about counting macros and things like that. And so I feel like she was very instrumental in just helping me to develop a healthier relationship with food. And so I
Yeah.
would certainly say for anyone in of your listeners who's struggling with that, like just developing a healthier relationship with food and your body is going to be helpful throughout this whole journey of infertility, but then also the rest of your life, right? Like whether you do end up getting pregnant or not, there are feelings and emotions that come with that that you want to find a healthier way to deal with. And even if you do ultimately end up having a child, it's very easy when you're trying to have a child and you don't have one to think that all the problems will be solved when you do have one.
Yep.
But that's not true. It just introduces a whole new set of problems. And so you still need to know how to deal with emotions in
Yep.
a way that isn't something unhealthy for your body. Uh,
Right.
and so I definitely, yeah, think that's important.
And to break those cycles moving forward. I mean, I
Yes.
think about the different generational standards. The standards for my mom and her generation were way different than our standards, which are way different from the next generation. And so, how
Right.
can, if these treatments are successful, how can we raise the healthiest children we can? Maybe we can set them up for success from the very beginning with a healthy relationship with their body and food, where there isn't all this undoing to be done either, right? So
Yes.
this unlearning, as I like to say.
And that's
Um,
why what I really like about the intuitive eating approach. And you mentioned I was a certified intuitive eating counselor, and partly I kind of did that as part of my own healing journey, just to delve deeper into it. But I really like the approach because it really just kind of teaches people to think of just food as just food, right? It's fuel for our body, but it's also okay to enjoy food sometime and not think about the calories and not worrying about that. And it's okay sometimes to splurge, and just it really helps us to that whole approach of intuitive eating gets us away from like the diet mentality and just more of a healthy relationship with food. And so I would say for any of your listeners who just kind of want to learn more about what a healthy relationship with food might look like, I think learning about intuitive eating is a good place to start. And there are so many resources online about intuitive eating, um, books about it, podcasts, etc., that can kind of start that journey for your listeners on developing a healthier relationship with food and learning to just kind of enjoy food for food. Like the two rules that I learned as I was going through my treatment, because one struggle people with eating disorders have is they have all these food rules. But
yep.
two of the rules I learned that were helpful were no food is bad food and all foods fit. And I just found that to be very uh, helpful. Um, you know, because we often learn that there's foods that are bad, and you might think, oh my gosh, I just ate an Oreo and an Oreo is a bad food, so is that going to cause my um IVF cycle to fail because I just ate this bad food? And then that you have all this stress around it. But I really like the idea that no food is bad food. Yes, of course we're not going to sit around and eat Oreos all day, but no food's bad food, all foods fit, they all have a place. Nothing, no one thing you're eating is why you did or did not get pregnant. It was just, those rules have been very helpful for me as I've been on my recovery journey.
Oh my gosh, same. And I think intuitive eating is really the way through. And it's funny, sometimes we might quote unquote splurge on something and then really like tune in and be like, oh, I actually don't think I feel so well. Maybe I might avoid that. So like we're like, we have all these rules. Oh, I, have all this sort of willpower. I really believe it's so not about willpower. And then it's like, oh, and then we decide to splurge. And it's like, oh, wait, I actually don't feel that well when I have that food. So
Right.
it's that sort of like, what is going to make me feel the best? What's going to make me feel the most powerful, what's going to nourish my body and my mind,
Right.
and how can I be free? And as you were talking, I was thinking about, the sort of the undercurrent of both eating problems and, fertility problems. At least one of the common threads is really, we don't trust our bodies, right? Like when I was in the worst throes of my issues with food and body image, I really did not trust that my body would give me the feedback, would process the nutrients. I had to be the one saying this many calories and this exercise schedule, and that's the way it's got to be. As I got into intuitive eating and, listening to my body and what exercise do I want, I started to realize, oh, my body has its own wisdom. It will process the nutrients. It will, tell me what I'm craving, what I'm hungry for based on my physiology. Like there's all these things I just didn't realize. And I think the same is true for the fertility journey. We're like, I have to do this and this journey, this order and this way,
Mhm.
and it has to happen on this timeline. And I think all those rules are really counterproductive. I think if we can get into that trusting space, that intuitive space of like, what is my body really called? Maybe it's trying for a couple months outside of IVF and seeing what happens. Maybe it's actually taking a break and going on a trip. Maybe it's stepping back from IVF and trying a few cycles of letrozole IUI again, if that's what's calling to you. There's no right way, but I think the underlying assumption is I can't trust myself. I can't trust my
Mhm.
body. And I think that when we learn to trust, it feels vulnerable, especially at first, while we're kind of
Mhm.
learning what it feels like. But I think that is actually where the power lies.
Yeah. No, and I remember that once I finally gave myself permission to that to eat anything, right? Like once I said, everything is an option, no food's bad food, all foods fit, everything's an option. Then that struggle went away. And it's like once I'm allowed to have something, then the power it had over me, kind of disappeared. And so I didn't have to try so hard. And so I think you're right. Like if even on the infertility journey, if you get rid of all the rules, because I think when you have all these rules and then you're always like, oh my gosh, I messed up on my rules, then that's so stressful. But then when you kind of get rid of all the rules, then it takes away a lot of that stress and you feel a lot
Right.
more freedom as you're going through the journey, and you're beating yourself up a lot less too.
That's right. And the rules are just arbitrary. I mean, they truly are just
Exactly.
arbitrary. And
Yes.
so have a good REI, take good care of yourself during the process, have an expanded view of
Right.
health, get yourself a coach, like,
Right.
like you said, Trina, you're like, gosh, if I had a coach during this time, it would have been a lot better. And then
Right.
also, I think once fertility is just the access point, right? We realize like,
Mhm.
oh, this, our whole lives, we're whole humans. And so for me, investing in coaching, I still do because I believe in it so much. I believe in the power to transform my own life. And, I'm sure you do too, Trina, like just because coaching works, it up levels every experience that we have of life, whether it's relationships or, fitness or, professional fulfillment, whatever it is, coaching will make it better if we got to put in the effort and be, willing to be uncomfortable in the sort of the growth zone. But I think we both believe that coaching is really the best way through. So
Right.
yeah,
And like I said, like I think it's when there's something you want that you don't have, it's so easy to think that once you get that thing, everything's going to be perfect. But I
exactly.
think that's so important to just remember that's not the case. And so
Right.
that's why getting the tools is helpful, because even if you do get the thing you want, you're still going to need the tools.
That's right. As one of my mentors says, there's no there, right? We're
Exactly.
always evolving. Oh my gosh. Well, Trina, this was such an amazing conversation. I'm sure my listeners are going to want to follow you and, subscribe and everything. What's the best place people can find you? And of course, we'll put all your socials in our show notes as well.
Yeah. My website is theaffordablelifecoach.com. So I would say they could find me there. And I, love talking about these things. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast to share my story.
Yes. And thank you for sharing. I think our vulnerability is our strength, and I truly believe we're stronger together. So thank you again. I look forward to all the future collaborations. And to my listeners, I love you. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Love and Science podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. If you found this conversation valuable, if you could please rate, review, and share this podcast with your trusted people, it would mean so much to me. If you want more tools to help you navigate the fertility journey, please book a discovery call with me today. The link is in the show notes. Please do not let infertility have the final word. I'm here to take the burden from you so that you can achieve your goal of building your family. In gratitude, this is Dr. Erica Bove. I'm rooting for you always.